Last November, my brother was visiting us from Dundee with his 3-year-old son. Since my brother had moved from Glasgow, we didn't get to see him or his family too often, and only a day into his visit, my brother was called back himself for an emergency. My nephew wanted to stay, as we bought him 2 tickets to the football the day after, so I agreed to take him back to his dad in Dundee after the game. The only train I could get was a fairly late one, and it was therefore the last one of the day. So I took my nephew to the football and headed straight to the station afterwards. The train was fairly busy, but I had booked us 2 seats. Just as we were about to board the train, the man standing next to me made an odd comment. Like, "Sardines, aren't they? I hate sardines," he said. I found this fairly odd and I just laughed it off awkwardly. I've never been good at making conversations with strangers and always feel uneasy when one approaches me. As we made our way to our seats, I noticed an old couple sitting there. I told them it was our seats, but they were fairly rude and told me that old people shouldn't be made to stand for a journey. I always hate confrontation, especially in public, so I just left. There were no 2 seats together anywhere on the train, so me and my nephew were forced to stand for about an hour until many people on the train finally got off when it stopped in Perth. Me and my nephew sat down and I mistakenly fell asleep as I was so tired after a fairly long day and standing for an hour on the train. As my nephew was only 3, he obviously fell asleep as well. I awoke just as the last passengers were getting off at Dundee. I quickly jumped up and tried to get my nephew off the train as quickly as possible, but he was too slow, and I had to stay on the train with him, meaning we missed the stop. As the train was delayed slightly, it was now going straight to Aberdeen, which was about another hour or so away. I sat down and tried to phone anyone I knew, but I didn't have any signal. I began to panic, as I knew that there would be no return trains from Aberdeen at this time of night, likely meaning I would have to stay the night there in a hotel. I tried to compose myself and looked to see if there was anyone who could maybe help me. My carriage had more or less cleared out by this point, and there was only 3 other people left. An older woman sleeping a few rows in front of me, a young man reading a book at the opposite side, and 3rd man behind me. I told my nephew to go back to sleep and started trying to plan what I would do when we got to Aberdeen. As my phone had no signal, this was obviously fairly difficult, and thought I should ask the man behind me for help. I looked in the window's reflection at him and noticed it was the same man who'd made the sardine comment earlier. He was a middle-aged man, fairly average build and height, and there was nothing to suggest he was in any way dangerous, except one thing. He was staring right at me. I looked away for a minute, thinking maybe he was just looking about the train, as I did only a moment ago. But when I looked again, he was still staring. His stare didn't seem to break until he got up to presumably go to the toilet. I debated switching to another carriage, but before I could gather my stuff and wake my nephew, he'd returned. Only this time, he sat in a different seat, facing me directly. A few uneasy minutes before he made his first comment. "Someone's sleepy," he said, nodding to my nephew. I laughed awkwardly and put my earphones in to avoid having to talk to him, even though my phone had just died. "Must be some set of earphones if they can listen to music when your phone's dead," he said. My heart dropped. "I'm only kidding you on." But I now had no excuse to avoid conversation with him. "So, you're going home or visiting someone?" he asked. I made the mistake of telling him what had happened and that I had missed my stop. "That's quite the situation. You won't get a train back at this time." I nodded and said, "I'll just find a hotel for the night." He then approached my seat and sat across from me. "Hotels will be all booked out, and even if they aren't, they'll charge you a fortune. I've got a place no far from the station. You can stay there for the night and get the train in the morning. I'll stay out of the way of you and your son, don't worry." I explained to the man it was not my son and that I was happy to cough up the money for a hotel, and tried to stay polite by saying I don't want to be a nuisance for him, even though I really just wanted to tell him to fuck off. "Oh, believe me, you won't be any nuisance to me," he said in an overly friendly tone. I was now feeling extremely unnerved, but still tried my best to talk myself out of the situation. This conversation carried on for another 10 minutes or so, and he was increasingly insistent that I stayed with him. I didn't have any idea what to do. I felt completely helpless. I told him I needed the toilet in an effort to get away from the carriage. This is when he grabbed my wrist below the table.
"You're not going anywhere,"
he said in a hushed tone.
"You're staying with me. I'll keep you safe,"
he said in an extremely chilling voice. I couldn't even bring myself to scream out in the situation. The only other passengers on the carriage were at the opposite end, and I was terrified that if I screamed, the man would hurt me or my nephew. He wouldn't let go of my wrist and repeatedly began saying,
"Just act natural."
The remaining part of the journey seemed to last a lifetime. I knew even then there was no light at the end of the tunnel, as this man would not let me go. The train finally reached Aberdeen, and the man told me to wake my nephew, not alarm him, and to tell him we were staying at this nice man's house for the evening. He held my hand, and as we got off the train, and my worst feelings were coming true, as I knew what would happen when this man got us back to his house. All of a sudden, I was knocked to the floor in a heap of bodies. The police had tackled the man and were arresting him. As I got to my feet, I grabbed my nephew's hand and ran only a couple of yards before completely breaking down. The police comforted me and told me that the young man, who was reading his book at the other side of the carriage, had noticed what was going on and sent a text to the British Transport Police, whose number is all over the walls of the train on posters. It took me a couple of minutes to process everything, but I managed to gain enough composure to thank the police and express my gratitude towards the man who had sent the text. I only managed to say a few words to him, but I will forever be grateful to him as he saved me from what would have been a night of terror and very possibly saved me and my nephew's life. The police very kindly took me and my nephew back to Dundee when my brother and his wife were extremely relieved to see us. It is now some time since this incident, but it has had a lasting effect on me, and I always make sure that when I am travelling late at night, that I am accompanied by someone and never run the risk of missing my stop ever again. This is something that happened this past Friday while I was babysitting. For a little bit of context, I'm a 21-year-old female, a college student, and have been babysitting since I was 14. I'm not an expert on literally anything. However, over the years, I have learned caution and resilience. At age 15, I took babysitting classes at our youth centre, as well as a female self-defence course. I babysit at least once a month for this one particular family. I like them because they pay me more than my usual hourly rate. They have a big house with internet that I can use to do homework, and the two kids are surprisingly well behaved and compliant. The two parents have like a monthly ritual of going out around 5 p.m. and returning a little after 2 a.m. I'm always offered to sleep in the guest bedroom and stay until morning. I usually just stay awake and abuse their satellite TV and then leave when they come back. The house is in a nice neighbourhood without a whole lot of neighbours, very quiet. Also, the house is armed with an alarm system that I have the code to and can arm and disarm it through my phone. That'll be relevant in a little while. So I always take them for pizza at this place that has like an arcade. I do this so they can tire themselves out and go to bed early. Plus, the little girl that I babysit is also on a mission to win a family of stuffed animals from the prize store. So I'd be the world's worst babysitter if I didn't guide her in that pursuit. If anyone may be wondering, for whatever reason, after Friday night, she only needs the daddy stuffed animal before her collection is complete. Anywho, I'm rambling. I was sitting at a table and watching them play in a ball pit, while also texting on my phone. This couple came over and sat at the same table as me. It was a long table with parents scattered here and there, so this wasn't alarming. The couple looked normal enough. Both were probably in their mid-20s, possibly a little older. They talked to each other, but then the guy asked me, "Are you the one babysitting Dr. So-and-so's kids?" So, the parents of these children are both doctors, and the specific region that we live in, this would be common enough information. But I still chose to answer their question with a relevant statement. I wonder what they used to make the pizza here. Yeah, I know, I'm a master of deception. I deserve an Oscar for my performance. However, they seemed to see right through my clever ruse. They started making weird comments. They talked about the kid's parents. They commented on the daughter and how they wondered if she would look as pretty as their mum. Okay, my dudes. I don't know if that was intended to be creepy, but I'm just going to be safe and pretend that it was. Then the woman says to me, and I quote, "Do they really let you dress like that while watching their kids?" She motioned with her eyes towards my t-shirt, which was admittedly a little tight, though aside from a little bit of bosom crack, not revealing. I have a thin frame and a large chest. It's 90 degrees in my region of the US right now, so it's not like I can wear a hoodie. My bust doesn't exactly have the greatest relationship with any shirt that has buttons. I saw that as my cue to go and get the kiddos and bring them to get their prizes so that we could bounce. They both got their prizes and we headed back over to the house. So fast forward a few hours, both kids were bathed and put to sleep. I delivered a heartwarming rendition of Goodnight Moon and read a very spooky chapter of The Werewolf of Fever Swamp and tucked them into dreamland. It was around 9 p.m. I was caught up on homework and just watching TV when I heard some movement on the porch. I didn't think much of it at first, but the doorknob started rattling violently. I initially started moving towards the front door to see who it was, but miraculously, I remembered that it was late at night. I was home alone with 2 kids, and I very much wanted to live. I turned around to grab my purse, which is where I kept my taser. As I'm moving, the back door starts rattling as well, and was accompanied by some banging noises. That's when I remembered that I hadn't enabled the alarm system after getting back. If this was a horror movie scenario, of course the alarm wouldn't have worked, and the intruders would have made their way inside. I hate to disappoint if you're expecting something more exciting, but I enabled it quite easily with no incident. I ran upstairs, grabbed the 2 kids, I put them in their parents' room in the walk-in closet. I still hate that I scared them when I gathered them up. I gave no context as to what was going on. I didn't want to tell them that someone was trying to break into their house, but in the process, the fear of not knowing seemed to be worse. I instructed them to stay in there and stay quiet, and only to open the door if they hear me talking to them. I then locked the bedroom door, which is the only door on the upstairs floor that locks. I sat there with my taser out and hit the panic button on my phone app. Several minutes went by. I got the notification through the app that the alarm system was disabled. I planned on calling 911, even though the panic button already took care of that, but I found it more beneficial to arm it back, then disarm it again. Then it disarmed again. I armed it again. Then it disarmed once again. So I armed it again. By this time, I could hear what sounded like 2 sets of footsteps walking up the stairs. Good job, girl. You've locked yourself inside with 2 potential assailants. I was holding it together for the sake of the kids, but not too deep inside. I was scared to death. When I heard the footsteps get near the door and saw the knob twisting, I took a deep breath and pulled the trigger on my taser just to let them know that I was armed, though it realistically wouldn't do much good. I informed them through the door that the alarm was triggered and police were on their way. Thankfully, I was greeted by a familiar voice. "You're safe." I opened the door and ran into their arms and started sobbing. I hadn't realised truly until it was over just how scared I really was. The kids came out without me giving them the okay, but their parents were there, so I'll let it slide. When I enabled the alarm on my phone, they both got the notification from the place they were at. With the app, you have the option to view the porch cameras as well. When they got the notification that the panic button was activated, they saw through the camera that there were people on each side of the house. 1 man, 1 woman. When the alarm kept disarming, that was them trying to get into the house. A police report was filed by them, and I gave a statement mentioning the 2 weirdos I'd met earlier that day. Even though there was really no evidence that would directly point to them, Camera footage didn't give any positive IDs either. So yeah, I was scared. I'm getting over it now. I'm just grateful that the couple I was babysitting were close enough to make it to me. I hate to say it, but I find the police response time to be terrible. I'm currently back in my own apartment an hour away. I checked in once to see how the kids were doing, and they're holding up fine. I'm just glad they had proper protection in their home, and that this didn't end up to be any worse.